Photos, free short video clips, free audio files to guide it. Yeah, you have to go look up some videos. Maybe we'll ever try to splice some in here because it's pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about the importance of text to video for agentic training because of the world model factor, right? So it allows you to simulate all these very exotic environments that contain out-of-distribution scenarios for your agents to train on. So you're thinking about how much driving does it take for a self-driving car startup to kind of have enough data to navigate streets well? Well, a lot of the reason it takes so many miles is that like weird shit happens and it takes a lot of miles to catch that. If you can simulate a lot of that interaction successfully with these sorts of environments, then you can skip past a lot of the expensive heavy lift part of that process. Not all of it, but a lot of it. They do make a point of saying, you like a lot of multi-scene storylines with constant characters and camera positions that seem natural together. That's a big deal, right? That is object permanence. That is a lot of the things that essentially the physics of these, I'm trying not to call them simulations, but the physics of these artifacts, something is being captured here. I'm sure this will be used, not this specifically, but this kind of pattern, this trajectory is absolutely going to be used to train agents and will translate into things like robotics surprisingly fast, I think.
Right. They also show some examples of, you can provide it a video clip of something that's already recorded and basically remix it. So take the exact same motion, but then change the subject and the environment. That works really well. So I think when people start getting access to these kinds of models, and it's early access, not too many people have the ability to try it yet, we are probably going to start seeing a lot more AI video popping up than we have so far with Vio and Sora. But we'll see. People, as always, are like, this is van for Hollywood, this is a game changer. I don't know if that's true, but this is certainly impressive from an AI capability side. And speaking of ByteDance, they also released Seedream 5.0, which is their image generation model that is kind of competitive with Google's Not a Banana. I think just a few months ago, Not a Banana blew our minds away by its ability to edit at a very, very high level. Just like edit in a way that looks like a human could do it. So now there is Seedream 5.0, which seems similarly capable. And at the same time, Alibaba released Qwen Image 2.0, which again is very good at this kind of stuff, especially better at Chinese characters. So again, what a week in terms of all this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And the sort of more relaxed Chinese policy, to put it generously, on copyright is very much in evidence here. I mean, like as you said, this is a train it on everything but the kitchen sink, and maybe even the kitchen sink situation, and it does get reflected in just the quality outputs and the breadth of outputs. So you need to check out some of these short clips if you haven't. There's just no way we'll be able to describe. Like, you can see a 25-second sort of Bruce Lee fight with a guy with 4 arms, and like it is absolutely, if you've ever seen Bruce Lee movies, like it's bang on. So yeah, I mean, we live in that world now. Let's see what happens in Hollywood as a response to this, but I would expect this will necessarily change the landscape, because how can it not at this point? So much of this is going to be open source too.
We got just a couple more impressive releases to cover. We've got GLM 5 from Jupu AI, which we've covered GLM 4.5 I think pretty recently, and it was already a very impressive coding model. GLM 5 continuing that progress. It looks a lot bigger. It's twice as big according to it, so unsurprisingly very strong. We also saw a new release from DeepSeek, which same thing, right? We're continuing to train it, and it has a context window of 1 million tokens, which is much bigger than the previous one of 128 tokens. And when you're doing agentic coding, this is actually a big deal. 1,000 tokens isn't that big. You're gonna run up at that limit very quickly, and that makes it challenging to work in larger code bases. You end up needing to do compaction, and that's where you start running into stupidity often. So getting it to 1 million, it makes it much stronger as an actual option to replace Cloud Code or work with Cloud Code instead of it. So yeah, I don't know if this is quite as big a deal as Opus 4.6 and Codex 5.3, but certainly also a pretty decent bump in capabilities.
Yeah, I mean, GLM 5 is a behemoth, and it is really impressive. It seems to be. I will say there's a bunch of, how would you say this? I'm a bit concerned about benchmark gaming to some extent, because when you go down to the bottom of their post, there's a bunch of footnotes about these eval modifications that they've made and a bunch of prompt adjustments for evals. They use slightly different evaluation setups than their competitors. They have like custom prompts, different context windows, temperature set, so in fact for Terminal Bench 2.0, they actually use their own verified version of it that, quotes, fixes some ambiguous instructions. So that can be real, it can be legit. It's just that there's so much benchmark gaming in this space that it also adds a little bit of noise to the signal here. But no question, this is a huge deal. Even being able to train a 744 billion parameter, 40 billion active parameter MOE is a huge deal from an architecture standpoint, from a compute standpoint. Pretty limited increase in training tokens, going from 23 trillion to 28.5 trillion. So that's not really what's making this better than 4.5. There are a bunch of improvements, but the big thing is this new RL framework or infrastructure called Slime that they're rolling out here that essentially improves training throughput and efficiency. It really is the kind of software engineering bedrock on which so much of this is based. We've done a bunch of podcasts on kind of like other frameworks like this. There's a bunch of detail here that we won't get into because it really is just the software engineering level, but it is crucial. One thing I will say, they call out that they used DeepSeek sparse attention. This is Jupu AI that's saying, hey, we're using DSA. This is the DeepSeek thing, and this is basically just the thing that came out, I think, with V3 back in the day. I'm trying to remember if it was V3 or V2, but basically it's a pretty simple idea. Instead of computing the attention weights for all tokens, you only need to identify which tokens are going to have likely a high attention weight. You only compute attention values for those. And so they train a lightweight indexer to get a rough idea of the attention scores, and they only keep tokens with higher indexer scores. So this is what DeepSeek sparse attention is. It's interesting that it finds itself being used by Jupu AI in the GLM 5 release. This has been a really persistent feature. You see this pop up quite a bit, and it's an enduring contribution that DeepSeek's made. A lot of these have happened, where DeepSeek comes out with something and then you sort of see it replicated from an engineering standpoint, and then integrated into other companies, especially Chinese companies' workflows.
Right. As you said, we did see a blog post release. I don't think we got a paper from GLM 5, but it reads similar to Opus 4.6 and Codex. They show a bunch of benchmark results. You know, in the benchmark results, it's like, oh, you're better than Opus 4.5. A little bit unfortunate that this happened just as Opus 4.6 came out and is better than GLM 5. But to be clear, Opus 4.5 was already really good, really intelligent. So this indicates that GLM 5 is quite capable. They call out that you can use it with Cloud Code, Open Code, Kilo Code. And by the way, in case you don't know, there's a whole suite of alternative coding agent frameworks to Cloud Code and Codex where you can use these various models. In the blog post, they also mention using it beyond coding to things like PDFs and Word and Excel. So it's one of these convergent moments, I guess. We've seen this a couple of times where everyone just sort of rushes on a new trend or a new thing, where we saw a kind of capability unlock. It took us a while to get there, it feels like, from the early days of Cloud Code being in, I think, March or February of 2025. I guess, you know, it maybe feels like there has been enough time where people figured out how to do RL, how to train agents, and now that they figured out the equation, they're just doing it. They're just throwing a computer at it, and it is getting better and better, and it doesn't seem to be stopping. I wouldn't be surprised if we got Opus 4.7 like a month or two, right? Now, since we're covering GPU, we'll also mention Minimax 2.5 just got announced, just came out. We're gonna hold off on that one for next week because like there's already been so much of this. We're gonna talk a little bit more about Qwen, Coder, and GLM maybe on the open source and project section, but we gotta close out this and move on to business. So real quick, also worth mentioning, Cursor did announce Composer 1.5. So Cursor, for context, is the coding ID. It used to be sort of like the exciting thing in 2024 with intelligent autocomplete. Now they are trying to be a Cloud Code, a Coder's competitor, and they claim that Composer 1.5 is a more capable coding agent. They train it a bunch more with reinforcement learning. They position it as the alternative to Cloud Code. Honestly, not as exciting as Opus 4.6, but Cursor is still used very widely. Personally, I don't use it. I'm still a Cloud Code stan, but I wouldn't be surprised if this actually did have quite an impact across organizations that use Cursor. And now on to the last thing in this loaded section. XAI did launch their Grok Imagine API for text and image to video. And there's not too many offerings in the space, actually. Veo is one. I think you can also use Seedream, Sora you can use, but that's about it. So they're entering a pretty competitive space with a few big players. In this one, you can create clips ranging from 1 to 15 seconds, resolutions of 480 and 720. So it's kind of a start. It's still not fully competitive, but from what I've seen, XAI hasn't been super competitive in the API space. I don't know how many companies are using their APIs as opposed to Google and OpenAI, and that's where a lot of the money is at, right? Is companies using your stuff to do their stuff. So XAI might be starting to get into that space.
Yeah, and I mean, the one thing I'll say here is it's not XAI, it's SpaceX. So SpaceX just dropped an API.
SpaceX, is it X? Oh, XAI got X, and then SpaceX got XAI. So now SpaceX has X and XAI within it.
That's right. It's the only rocket company with a social media company.
Yeah, I know. It's truly one of a kind. Well, that is it for all the crazy news this week. On to something a bit more typical, I guess, for this podcast. Applications and business. First up, we've got a few stories about companies hitting big valuations. 11 Labs, I think, covered previously that they were doing this raise. Now it looks like they finished the raise. They raised $500 million, reached an $11 billion valuation, more than triple of the $3.3 billion from just a year ago. 11 Labs, as a refresher, does text to audio primarily. All sorts of text to audio. They do speech generation, they do music generation, they do sound effect generation. And as far as I'm aware, they are quite a big margin, the leader in the space of speech generation. And, probably it doesn't get as much hype as image generation or video generation or LLMs or chatbots, but it has a lot of very practical business use cases. So I think this $11 billion price tag is reflective of them being a big deal in the space.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy what we've gotten used to, right? They were founded in 2022. Like the typical startup cycle, I'm old enough to remember 2018 when the idea was you found a company, 7 years later, you're going to IPO. And maybe later if you're doing hardware, but all the VC dollars were oriented towards that kind of timeline. And now, you got companies that launch and it's like within 6 months, and there are quite a few of them. So these guys are one of those. Pretty remarkable. It's also a hell of a cap table. Sequoia leading this round, right? I mean, that basically number one fund in the Valley, and recent Horowitz on board as well. Iconic, Lightspeed. So, this is a serious round, and it should be taken seriously.
Right. It's coming. Apparently, they reported $330 million in annual recurring revenue for 2025. So, not at the OpenAI whatever level, but $330 million. Like the startup is raking in money already.
Well, so the thing I always, unfortunately, we don't get to know this because they're not publicly traded, but I would love to know the margins. What are the margins on these queries? What's going on there? That is the whole game, right? Because when you're running, a whole stack of compute and you're paying the compute provider, you're making some kind of margin on top of that. Often it's negative, by the way. A lot of VC dollars getting burned up. If you look at Mistral, it's a really good example of a company that's lighting a lot of their, or did at one point anyway, light a lot of their VC dollars on fire, just subsidizing queries to try to get market share. So if they're raising at $11 billion, then that suggests exactly what you said, Andre. That's got to be either they have a very clear story about how they get to good margin, or maybe they're already there.
Right. And fun fact, actually, Astrocade, we use 11 Labs both for sound effect generation and music generation. You could use it also for speech generation. So from my little knowledge of the space, it does seem to be that, unlike OpenAI and Anthropic and Google, all of these LLMs are kind of similarly competitive, right? Yeah, maybe Claude is a little better at coding, but honestly, you can make any one of them work if you wanted to for your LLM needs. 11 Labs it seems like it's in the lead in the space.
Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised if their margins are a bit healthier than, LLMs or chatbots.
And that's
strong competition.
I would love to see how that changes, and you'll be the person to check in with on that, say 6 months from now, as more open source options, come online and the watermark goes up. Because at a certain point, it's going to be like what we're seeing with images, where a new image model comes out, and you're like, okay, but we're already we've solved this in a way. So I'm curious for your purpose, because you're tracking the absolute very high end of what needs to be done with this. That's going to be really fascinating to watch.
Right, and I guess it plays into a bigger story, which I've always been curious about from a business side of AI. Is being a model provider going to stay profitable, given that there's not many players in space, but the players in the space are very competitive? OpenAI, Google, again, Anthropic, each provide a strong offering that if push came to shove and it was a lot cheaper, you could use it. Now, also true, enterprises are willing to pay top dollar for whatever is best. So I think that's part of the reason Anthropic is doing well, is they don't need to be cheaper to win customers at this point. But if things are getting neck to neck, which Codex 5 free and Gemini free and Claude is becoming more of a case perhaps than it used to be, the margins have to start falling, right?
Oh yeah, and the other thing that used to save enterprise margins was the switching cost, right? You get vendor lock-in and everybody be like, you're on AWS, you can't get off AWS now, and now you're fucked, no matter how, not to rag on AWS, but, there are many cases like that. Well, with the automation of software writing, that means vendor lock-in is not what it used to be. So switching from one to the other, that might make things a lot more competitive, might drive down margins. It's like hard to know for sure, but that could be a thing.
And on that note, also worth noting, no news on this front, but I think kind of in the background, API gateways have been kind of growing as a thing. We use Light LLM as a kind of unified bridge to any sort of LLM. Now there's server-side gateways that do a whole bunch of stuff for you. So it's getting easier and easier